Why was the Roman army so unstoppable? What were their main secrets? Today I will tell you about it. The Roman army existed for over 1,000 years, becoming synonymous with order, discipline, and conquest. Other civilizations created great armies, but none of them could compare to Rome in terms of longevity and effectiveness. The secret of their success lay not only in their weapons or tactics, but also in the very structure that turned the legion into a perfect machine. This machine was so effective that Rome's enemies constantly tried to copy its design, but almost always failed. They could borrow armor, weapons, and even battle formations, but they could not reproduce the most important thing: the spirit and organization of the legion. It was a system in which every element, from the simple soldier to the most complex siege engine, worked with flawless precision. The Romans changed the very concept of war, transforming it from a chaotic clash of warriors into a science. They built roads and bridges with the same methodical approach with which they fought on the battlefield. Their legacy is not just a history of conquest, but a textbook on logistics, engineering, and psychology that is still relevant today. Watch the video to the end to learn how one simple reform turned crowds of farmers into the most professional army in human history. What if I told you that everything you believed about the birth of great armies is not true? The power of Rome was not born on the battlefield, but as a result of a single social experiment that changed everything. Until the end of the 1st century BC, the Roman army was a militia consisting of citizen landowners who armed themselves at their own expense. This created a constant shortage of soldiers for protracted wars far from home. It is important to note that the idea of the Marian reforms as a revolutionary turning point is a simplification of a more complex and gradual process. If you were a historian studying the Roman army, you would find that many of the changes attributed to Marius began before him or ended after him. The transformation of the army was evolutionary, not revolutionary. The commander Gaius Marius realized that the system had exhausted itself. He carried out a reform that opened the doors to the army to all citizens, even the poorest and landless. The state now covered the costs of armament and training, turning military service into a profession and a career path. This decision had enormous consequences. Thousands of people flocked to the legions, for whom the army became the only social ladder. They were motivated not only by the defense of their land, but also by pay, a share in the spoils, and the hope of receiving a land grant after completing their service. Marius did indeed recruit capite censi, proletarians without property qualifications, into the army in 107 BC for the war with Jugurtha. However, this was not a formal abolition of property qualifications, but a military necessity. Similar recruitments had occurred earlier in crisis situations. State provisioning of the army also developed gradually. Already in the 2nd century BC, the state partially provided for soldiers. Marius standardized and expanded this practice, but did not invent it. Thus was born a professional army, loyal not so much to the Senate as to their commander, who secured their future. Soldiers now served not for a few years, but for 20 or even 25. During this time, they became true experts in military affairs. The structure of the legion itself also changed. Marius introduced the cohort as the basic tactical unit, which made the legion more flexible and manageable on the battlefield. This new organization allowed for quick reorganization and adaptation to any situation. The fixed 25-year term of service was established by Augustus, not Marius, almost a century later. Under Marius, the length of service varied depending on the circumstances. The cohort organization was also not an invention of Marius. Cohorts as administrative units existed earlier. Marius may have standardized their use as tactical units, but archaeological and textual evidence is ambiguous. Many historians believe that cohort tactics developed gradually over decades. The legion's standard, the eagle, became a sacred symbol for which soldiers were willing to give their lives. This created an unprecedented sense of unity and corporate honor. The legion became a soldier's home, family, and meaning in life. This new army was capable of conducting long campaigns thousands of kilometers from Rome. The soldiers were resilient, disciplined, and motivated. It was this reform that laid the foundation for future great conquests. The aquila, or eagle of the legion, truly became the main standard under Marius, replacing the previous 5 symbols. This strengthened the unity of the legion as a corporate unit. However, the Roman army had been conducting long foreign campaigns long before Marius. The Punic Wars, the conquest of Greece and Macedonia, the wars in Spain, all of this took place in the 2nd century BC with an army that was still formally based on the old system. It created an army that could not only fight, but also build, govern, and assimilate. The legions became not just a military force, but an instrument for spreading Roman civilization. It was a revolution whose effects were felt for centuries. This system turned the army into the most stable institution in the state. Soldiers were interested in the prosperity of the empire, as their own well-being depended on it. They became the backbone and main driving force of Rome. This statement requires critical evaluation. The Marian army did not create stability, but political instability. Legions loyal to their commanders, not to the state, became instruments of civil war. Sulla, Pompey, Caesar, Crassus all used their armies for political power. This system led to the collapse of the Republic. Thus, the secret of the Roman army's invincibility began not with the sword, but with an idea. The idea that any citizen, regardless of their origin, could become a professional defender of the state. What do you think about how social reforms can affect a country's military power? Are you ready to learn the truth about how the most effective combat unit in history was organized? The legion was not just a collection of soldiers. It was a living organism, a complex mechanism where every detail had its place and function. Its structure was refined over centuries, reaching its peak of efficiency during the empire. Imagine a military unit of about 5,000 men capable of functioning as a single entity or breaking up into dozens of independent combat groups depending on the situation. If you were a Roman commander in charge of a legion, you would not be managing a monolithic mass, but a flexible system of interdependent elements, where the loss of one unit would not paralyze the entire structure. The legion was based on 10 cohorts, each of which numbered about 480 men. The first cohort was the largest and most prestigious, serving the best soldiers. This created internal competition and motivation for each legionnaire. Each cohort, in turn, was divided into 6 centuries of 80 men each. The centuries were commanded by centurions, the backbone of the entire army. These were experienced veterans who had risen from the ranks of ordinary soldiers and knew war firsthand. The figures need to be clarified. The structure of the legion changed over time. In the early empire under Augustus, the first cohort was indeed larger than the others, with about 800 men divided into 5 centuries of 160 men each. The 2nd to 10th cohorts numbered 480 men each, divided into 6 centuries of 80 men each. The total strength of the legion was about 5,120 infantrymen, plus 120 cavalrymen. Centurions were indeed key figures. The first centurion of the first cohort, Primus Pilus, was the highest-ranking and most influential centurion in the legion. This modular structure gave the legion incredible flexibility. Cohorts could operate independently or as part of the entire legion. This allowed the commander to adapt tactics to any terrain and any opponent. In addition to heavy infantry, the legion also included auxiliary units, cavalry, archers, slingers. All of them performed their specific tasks, covering the flanks and conducting reconnaissance. This system of interaction between different branches of the army was the key to success. An important clarification: the legion consisted mainly of heavy infantry of Roman citizens. Archers, slingers, and most of the cavalry belonged to the auxilia, auxiliary troops that were not formally part of the legion, but acted in conjunction with it. The auxilia were recruited from non-citizens of the provinces and organized into separate cohorts and alai. A typical army group included 1 or more legions, plus approximately an equal number of auxiliary troops. Managing such a complex organization required a flawless system of command and communication. Orders were transmitted by standard bearers, buglers, and couriers. Each soldier knew dozens of signals and maneuvers, practicing them until they became automatic during daily training. A clear hierarchy ensured strict discipline. Legates, tribunes, centurions, everyone knew their place and their responsibilities. This chain of command worked flawlessly, allowing thousands of people to be managed in the chaos of battle. The signaling system included the sounds of trumpets and horns to convey commands over long distances, as well as visual signals from standards and banners. Regular training was indeed critical. Vegetatius, in de re militari, emphasizes the importance of constant drills. The chain of command was as follows. The legate commanded the legion. Under him were 6 military tribunes, then the camp prefect, then 59 centurions of various ranks. The system was bureaucratic and effective. But the legion was not just a combat unit. It included engineers, doctors, surveyors, carpenters, and blacksmiths. In fact, it was a mobile city capable of providing itself with everything it needed far from home. This self-sufficiency allowed the legions to operate autonomously for long periods of time. They could build roads, bridges, siege structures, and even entire fortresses. The army was not only an instrument of conquest, but also of exploration of new territories. Indeed, the legion included specialists from various professions: fabbri, engineers and craftsmen, medici, doctors, mensors, surveyors, architects. The legion could build a fortified camp in a few hours, erect a bridge across a river in a few days, and lay a road in a few months. This engineering ability was a strategic advantage. The Romans did not simply conquer territories, they transformed them, creating infrastructure for long-term control. The structure of the legion was so successful that it remained virtually unchanged for centuries. It was the pinnacle of military thought in the ancient world. This statement requires some nuance. The structure of the legion evolved significantly from the Republic to the late Empire. The legion of the 3rd century AD was significantly different from the legion of Augustus's time. Smaller in number, armed differently and used tactically in a different way. Nevertheless, the basic principles, modularity, a clear hierarchy, and a combination of combat and engineering functions, did indeed remain constant and were extremely effective. The structure of the legion was so successful that it remained virtually unchanged for centuries. It was the pinnacle of military thought in the ancient world. But even the most perfect mechanism is useless without high-quality parts. Are you ready to learn how the equipment of a simple legionary turned him into a universal soldier? I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of the Roman army. A legionnaire's success on the battlefield depended not only on his training, but also on his equipment, which was a true marvel of engineering. Each piece of equipment was thought out to the smallest detail and performed several functions at once, being the result of centuries of evolution. The central element of protection was a large rectangular shield called a scutum. It was made of several layers of glued wood and covered with leather. This design made it lightweight but extremely durable, capable of withstanding heavy blows. The cylindrical shape of the scutum allowed legionaries to close ranks in the famous Tortoise formation, Testudo. In this formation, soldiers were protected from projectiles on all sides. It was a real mobile fortress on the battlefield. Offensive weapons were also standardized and highly effective. The short sword, the gladius, was ideal for close combat in tight formations. Its shape was designed for quick and accurate stabbing blows. But before the gladius was used, the legionaries used their unique weapon, the pilum throwing spear. Its design was ingenious. A long, thin metal tip was attached to the shaft with a soft iron rod. When it hit an enemy's shield, the rod bent, making the pilum unusable for reuse. Thus, the pilum not only hit the target, but also disabled the enemy's main means of defense. The enemy was forced to either drop their heavy, spear-laden shield or fight while being restricted in their movements. It was a tactical move that gave the Romans a huge advantage at the very beginning of the battle. The legionnaire's armor, known as lorica segmentata, consisted of metal plates connected by straps. It provided excellent protection, but was flexible enough not to restrict movement. Its modular design also made it easy to repair in the field. Even the legionnaire's footwear, caligae, was thought out to the smallest detail. These were sturdy sandals with nail-studded soles. The nails not only increased wear resistance, but also provided better traction during long marches. Each legionnaire carried not only weapons and armor, but also a full set of survival tools. His field kit included a shovel, a pickaxe, a saw, and 2 poles for building a palisade. The army was ready to turn into a construction battalion at any moment. Thus, the equipment of a Roman soldier was not just a set of items. It was a whole system that provided him with protection, firepower, and autonomy. It turned every legionnaire into a universal combat unit. What I am about to show you was a secret that cost thousands of lives. The most sophisticated weapons and the most well-thought-out tactics are useless without the main element: discipline. It was iron discipline that was the cement that held the legions together and turned them into a single, indestructible force. The basis of discipline was a system of constant and grueling training that never stopped for a single day. Recruits underwent months of training that turned yesterday's peasants and craftsmen into real professional soldiers. This transformation process was so effective that many historians call it the first mass military training system in history. They learned not only to wield weapons and defend themselves with shields, but also to act as a single unit, feel the shoulder of their comrade, and understand commands without words. Daily exercises included grueling marches of up to 30 or more kilometers in full combat gear, weighing about 30 kilograms. Imagine a soldier carrying armor, weapons, digging tools, food supplies, and personal belongings. Soldiers learned to build a fully fortified camp with ramparts and moats in just a few hours, swim in full gear even in turbulent rivers, throw heavy spears with accuracy at distances of up to 30 meters, and fight with swords for several hours at a time without a break. This continuous training made all actions completely automatic, so that in battle, legionnaires acted without thinking, relying on muscle memory and skills honed to perfection. Discipline was maintained by a well-thought-out and fair system of rewards and punishments that affected every soldier. For bravery in battle, special services to the legion, and distinctions in combat, soldiers could receive generous monetary rewards, which sometimes exceeded their annual salary, promotions with a corresponding increase in status and influence, or honorary decorations, phalae, which were worn on the chest and were a source of pride. These awards were passed down through generations and became family heirlooms. This created a powerful incentive for every legionnaire to strive for feats and excellence. On the other hand, cowardice on the battlefield, disobeying a direct order from a commander, or violating the military oath were followed by severe and often cruel punishments. Responsibility was both individual, when the specific offender was punished, and collective, when an entire unit was held responsible for the misconduct of one person. There was a practice of decimation, when every 10th soldier in the offending unit was executed by his own comrades. This forced soldiers not only to be responsible for their own actions, but also to closely monitor the behavior of their comrades, preventing possible violations. The key figure in maintaining discipline and morale was the centurion, the commander of a century of 80 men. He was not just a military leader giving orders, but a true father and wise mentor to his soldiers, who respected and even loved him. His authority was based on his rich personal combat experience, proven bravery in dozens of battles, and ability to lead people even in the most dangerous situations. The symbol of his power and the tool for maintaining order was a vine, a special stick with which he could punish negligent soldiers on the spot without waiting for a formal investigation. Discipline was evident not only in battle and training, but also in the daily life of the legionnaires. A strict daily routine was scheduled for every hour from dawn to lights out. Regular and thorough care of weapons and armor was a mandatory ritual, and active participation in large-scale construction work. The construction of roads, bridges, aqueducts, and fortresses was an integral part of service. Legionnaires were not only warriors, but also engineers and builders who left behind thousands of kilometers of roads throughout Europe. All this was part of a soldier's life and shaped their character. Strict order and familiar routine helped maintain high morale and psychological stability, even in the most difficult conditions of long campaigns and exhausting sieges. This well-oiled system created a special type of soldier, people who unquestioningly and without the slightest hesitation carried out any order from their commander. even the most dangerous and risky ones. They blindly trusted their battle-hardened commanders and were absolutely confident in the reliability of their comrades standing next to them in formation. This deep sense of unity, brotherhood in arms, and mutual trust was Rome's main psychological weapon, one that could not be bought with money or forged in a smithy. It was this unwavering discipline that allowed the Romans to perform the most complex tactical maneuvers directly on the battlefield, in the thick of battle. Quick changes from column to battle line, smooth replacement of tired front lines with fresh reserves, perfectly coordinated attacks by different parts of the legion at the right moment. All this required the highest level of organization, coordination, and mutual understanding between thousands of people. While enemy armies, whether Gauls, Germans, or Parthians, often consisted of a chaotic crowd of brave but disorganized warriors relying on personal valor, the Romans acted as a single well-oiled machine, where every detail knew its place and function. Thus, discipline was not just a set of dry rules and instructions written down in military regulations, but the basis of a legionnaire's worldview and self-identity, part of his soul. It transformed thousands of individuals with different characters, from different provinces and with different pasts, into a monolithic, invincible force capable of crushing any enemy, regardless of its size or ferocity. But how did this enormous military machine, numbering tens of thousands of people, provide itself with everything it needed: food, weapons, medicine, far from home in foreign lands? In the next chapter, you will learn about the ingenious and incredibly effective system of Roman military logistics. The success of the Roman legions would have been impossible without one inconspicuous but critically important component: logistics. The ability to supply an army of thousands with food, equipment, and fodder in enemy territory was one of Rome's main advantages. They turned supply from a problem into a strategic tool. The basis of Roman logistics was an extensive network of roads that they built throughout the empire. These roads allowed them to quickly move not only troops, but also supply convoys. Each newly conquered province was immediately covered by a network of first-class roads. The legionnaires' diet was based on grain. It was nutritious, could be stored for a long time, and was easy to transport. Each soldier received a daily ration of grain, from which he ground flour and baked flatbread himself. Huge convoys consisting of thousands of mules and carts were used to transport goods. Each unit had its own convoy that followed the army. Managing this gigantic caravan required the highest level of organization. The Romans were masters of planning. Before the start of any major campaign, they set up forward bases and warehouses where food and equipment supplies were stockpiled. This allowed the army to operate without straying far from its supply lines. When the army operated far from its bases, it used local resources. Foragers, under guard, went out in search of grain and livestock. This process, called requisitioning, was strictly organized so that it did not turn into chaotic looting. Water was also a critical resource. Army routes were always planned with drinking water sources in mind. Engineers were able to quickly find water and build wells. Weapons and equipment were repaired right on the march. The legion included blacksmiths, armorers, and saddlers who could fix almost any damage. This ensured the army's constant combat readiness. The Roman supply system was so efficient that it allowed wars to be waged for years, thousands of kilometers from the capital. No other army of that time had such capabilities. Logistics was their silent but deadly weapon. This complex system required precise accounting and control. The army had special officials responsible for food distribution and record-keeping. Roman bureaucracy worked as efficiently as Roman swords. Thus, Rome's victories were forged not only on the battlefields, but also on the roads, in the warehouses, and in the supply headquarters. Their ability to feed and arm their army was as important a factor in their success as the discipline of the legionaries. What if I showed you a time machine? The Roman army was unique in that its soldiers were not only warriors, but also first-class engineers. Their ability to build complex structures in the shortest possible time gave them a huge tactical and strategic advantage. Every legionnaire was trained in the basics of engineering. He knew how to dig, chop, saw, and build. This turned the entire army into a giant construction battalion capable of tackling the most ambitious tasks. The most famous example of Roman engineering genius is their roads. They built them throughout the empire using advanced technology. These roads were not just communication routes, but strategic arteries that ensured the mobility of the legions. No less impressive were the Roman bridges. Caesar's famous bridge across the Rhine, built in just 10 days, was a demonstration of Rome's technical superiority. It allowed an entire army to cross a wide and fast-flowing river, which was considered impossible. Roman engineers were unrivaled in siege warfare. They built giant siege towers that allowed them to storm even the highest walls. These towers were veritable mobile fortresses, equipped with drawbridges and platforms for archers. Battering rams, huge logs with metal tips, were used to destroy the walls. The Romans built covered galleries to protect the soldiers operating the battering rams. It was slow but inevitable work to destroy the enemy's fortifications. Roman artillery, such as ballistas and onagers, was the pinnacle of ancient military technology. Ballistas fired heavy arrows or stones with high accuracy over long distances. Onagers were designed to throw large stone projectiles in a curved trajectory. These machines allowed the Romans to suppress defenders on the walls and destroy fortifications even before the assault began. Each siege was a carefully planned engineering operation. The Romans preferred methodical work to brute force. The genius of Roman engineers was also evident in their hydraulic structures. They could drain swamps, build canals, and even change the course of rivers to deprive a besieged city of water. They used nature itself as a weapon. Thus, the Roman army won not only with the sword, but also with the shovel. Their engineering skills were as formidable a weapon as their battle formations. But their most amazing creations were not bridges and towers, but fortresses, which they could build in just one day. After each day's march, no matter how tired the soldiers were, the most important part of their routine began: building a fortified camp or castrum. This practice was unique to the Roman army and gave it a huge advantage. The camp was not just a place to sleep, but a full-fledged military base. The camp was built according to a standard plan that every soldier knew. This allowed thousands of people to work quickly and efficiently without unnecessary commands. The whole process took only a few hours. First, military engineers marked out the perimeter and main streets of the future camp on the ground. The plan was always the same: a rectangle with two main streets intersecting at right angles. This ensured ease of movement and quick organization of defenses. Then the legionnaires got to work. First, they dug a moat around the entire perimeter of the camp. The depth and width of the moat depended on the perceived threat, but it was always a serious obstacle for attackers. The earth from the moat was used to create a rampart on the inside. This earthen rampart served as the foundation for the wall. A palisade of sharpened stakes, which each soldier carried with him, was installed on top of the rampart. There were 4 gates in the camp wall, one on each side. The gates were carefully fortified and guarded. Wooden towers for observers and archers could be erected at the corners of the camp and above the gates. Inside the camp, everything was also strictly standardized. Each cohort and each centuria knew its exact place for setting up tents. The commander's tent, the praetorium, was always located in the center of the camp, at the intersection of the main streets. This organization helped avoid chaos and confusion. In case of a sudden night attack, every soldier knew where to run and which section of the wall to defend. The camp was not only a fortress, but also a perfectly organized space. This practice gave the Romans a sense of security even in enemy territory. They never spent the night in an unprotected place. This allowed the soldiers to rest properly, knowing that they were under reliable protection. The Roman camp was a symbol of order and discipline. It demonstrated the power and organization of the legions to the enemy. Often, the mere sight of a castrum under construction was enough to demoralize the enemy and force them to abandon their attack. When the Roman army encountered a well-fortified city, it did not rely on luck or blind assault. Siege warfare was a scientific discipline for them, methodical and inevitable. They combined engineering, tactical patience, and psychological pressure. The first step in any siege was to completely blockade the city. The legions built a continuous line of fortifications around their target, called a circumvallation line. This cut off the besieged from any outside help and made a breakthrough impossible. If there was a threat of an enemy army approaching to break the blockade, the Romans built a second line of fortifications. This countervallation line faced outwards. In this way, the Roman army found itself in a fortress capable of fighting on two fronts. After the blockade was established, the engineering phase began. The Romans built siege ramps, huge mounds of earth and wood that led to the city walls. They rolled siege towers and battering rams up these ramps. Siege towers were the pinnacle of ancient military engineering. They were multi-story wooden structures covered with raw hides to protect them from incendiary projectiles. From the top platform of the tower, archers could fire at the defenders of the walls. At the same time, work was underway to undermine the walls. Special teams of sappers dug tunnels under the enemy fortifications. Once they reached the wall's foundation, they reinforced the tunnel with wooden supports and then set them on fire, causing the wall to collapse. Roman artillery bombarded the city continuously. Ballistas and catapults destroyed walls and towers, and also exerted enormous psychological pressure on the inhabitants. The constant rumbling and destruction wore down the besieged. The Romans were patient. They understood that hunger and despair were their best allies. The siege could last for months or even years until the defenders surrendered or a breach was made in the defenses. When the moment came to storm the city, it was carefully prepared. Legionnaires attacked through breaches in the walls, from siege towers and using assault ladders. It was a coordinated attack from several directions. The tactics of siege warfare demonstrated the Roman approach to war. They turned a chaotic assault into a methodical process, where engineering and discipline played a more important role than individual bravery. Any city, no matter how impregnable it seemed, was doomed. The power of the Roman army on land would have been impossible without complete domination of the sea. The Roman navy was not so much a tool for naval battles as it was a crucial element of logistics and strategic control. They turned the Mediterranean Sea into their inner lake, Mare Nostrum. Initially, Rome was not a maritime power. They learned to build warships and fight at sea during the Punic Wars against Carthage. They did not simply copy Carthaginian technology, but improved upon it by adding their own unique invention. This invention was the corvus, a boarding bridge. This device allowed them to latch onto an enemy ship and transfer legionnaires onto its deck. In this way, the Romans turned naval combat, where they were weak, into land combat, where they were unmatched. After defeating Carthage and other maritime powers, the Roman fleet began to perform three main functions. The first and most important was the fight against piracy. Pirates were a real scourge for maritime trade, but the Romans systematically destroyed their bases and made shipping safe. The second function was transportation. The fleet ensured the rapid and safe transfer of legions from one province to another. Ships could transport the army over vast distances much faster than overland. The third and perhaps most critical task was to ensure the supply of grain. Rome, as a huge metropolis, was completely dependent on grain supplies from Egypt and North Africa. The fleet protected these grain fleets, without which the capital would have faced starvation. Roman warships, such as triremes and quinqueremes, were standardized and built in state shipyards. The crews consisted of professional sailors, often recruited from the inhabitants of coastal provinces with rich seafaring traditions. The fleet had several permanent bases at key points in the Mediterranean, such as Miseno and Ravenna in Italy. This allowed it to respond quickly to any threat. The Roman fleet was an instrument of peace and stability, the Pax Romana. Although the fleet rarely participated in major battles during the empire, its constant presence was a guarantee of Roman domination. It held together a vast empire, ensuring economic prosperity and military mobility. The land army and the navy were two sides of the same coin of Roman power. Rome's real strength lay not only in its ability to conquer, but also in its ability to hold and integrate the conquered territories. The legions were not only a force of destruction, but also an instrument of creation and Romanization. They won not only the war, but also the peace that followed. After conquering a new province, The Romans did not seek to destroy the local elite. On the contrary, they encouraged them to cooperate by offering access to Roman culture, education, and ultimately, citizenship. This turned yesterday's enemies into loyal allies. The army played a crucial role in this process. After completing their service, veterans of the legions often received land grants in the new provinces. They founded colonies that became centers for the spread of the Latin language, Roman laws, and the Roman way of life. Another ingenious tool for integration was auxiliary troops, or auxiliaries. The Romans actively recruited representatives of conquered peoples into their army. This solved several problems at once. First, it allowed them to use the unique military skills of different peoples. Gallic cavalry, Balearic slingers, Germanic spearmen, all of them became part of the Roman military machine. This gave the legions tactical flexibility, which they sometimes lacked. Second, service in the auxiliary troops was a path to Romanization and citizenship for the provincials. After serving for 25 years, an auxiliary soldier and his children became full Roman citizens. This was a powerful incentive for loyal service. Thus, the army became a melting pot in which representatives of dozens of different peoples became Romans. They fought for the empire that gave them a future. Yesterday's enemies defended Rome's borders from their own former tribesmen. This system allowed Rome to effectively control a vast and multinational empire without maintaining huge garrisons in every province. Loyalty was ensured not only by force, but also by the opportunities that the empire offered. Rome offered peace, order, and prosperity in exchange for loyalty. The legions built roads, aqueducts, and cities, bringing civilization to the most remote corners of the world. The army was the main driving force behind the process that transformed a conglomerate of conquered territories into a single cultural and economic space. It was this ability to assimilate, not just conquer, that was the main secret of the Roman Empire's longevity. The Romans created an army that could not only win battles, but also build an empire, maintain order within it, and assimilate conquered peoples. Their legacy is not just the ruins of ancient cities, but fundamental principles of organization, discipline, and strategy. That is why the Roman army remains the benchmark against which all subsequent military forces are measured. It proved that true strength lies not in technological superiority or numbers, but in organization and human potential. The legions were unstoppable because they were more than just an army. They were the embodiment of Rome itself, its order, its ambitions, and its civilizing mission. Suggest topics for future videos you would like to see on our channel in the comments. What other great army or civilization interests you? Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on new research into the greatest pages of military history.